Hey everyone, Elizabeth here. The Last Laugh delivers stories that leave you speechless. If you're here for it, hit subscribe and let's go.
The morning they left without me. "Don't embarrass us," my mother said. She didn't look at me when she said it. She was checking her lipstick in the hallway mirror, pressing her lips together, tilting her chin. My father was behind her, adjusting his cufflinks, the gold ones he only wore when he wanted people to take him seriously. My brother Marcus was already at the door with his leather portfolio under his arm, the one he'd bought specifically for this meeting, the one that still had the price sticker on the bottom edge that he hadn't noticed. "This is a $40 million contract," my mother continued, still not looking at me. "This isn't the time for questions or opinions or whatever it is you think you contribute. Stay home." My father finally glanced at me over her shoulder. "You wouldn't understand the room, sweetheart." He said sweetheart the way some people say bless your heart. Soft on the surface, nothing underneath. "We've been building toward this for 2 years. Let us handle it." Marcus caught my eye as he held the door. I thought I saw something flicker there. Not cruelty, more like discomfort, like a man who knows a joke has gone too far but laughs anyway because stopping now would cost him too much. He looked away first. "Good luck," I said. My mother finally turned. She studied me for one long moment. My coffee cup, my laptop on the kitchen counter, my bare feet on the tile floor. Then she smiled the way she always smiled when she thought she'd already won. "We won't need it," she said. The door closed. I stood in the kitchen for a moment, listening to their footsteps in the hallway outside, the elevator, the silence after. Then I picked up my phone and sent a single text to my assistant, Priya. "On my way in 10. Tell Daniel I'll be there before they arrive." I finished my coffee. I put on my shoes. I took the blazer from the hook by the door. The charcoal one, the good one, the one my mother had never seen because I had never worn it in this apartment, and I left. I should tell you how we got here. Not because the ending requires it, but because nothing that happens in that boardroom makes sense without understanding what came before it. My name is Claire Sutton. I am 34 years old. I grew up in a 3-bedroom house in suburban Columbus, Ohio, with parents who loved me in the particular way that some parents love a child who doesn't fit the story they'd written for themselves. With effort, with visible strain, with a kind of baffled resentment that they never fully acknowledged and never fully hid. My mother, Diane, had built her identity around competence. She was the woman who chaired every committee, organized every fundraiser, sent the most thorough emails. She was good at the things that could be seen and measured in a room of people like her. My father, Richard, had spent his career in mid-level sales management at a company that made industrial ventilation equipment. He was not unsuccessful. He was not a failure. But somewhere in his 50s he had looked up and realized that the life he was living was smaller than the one he'd imagined at 25, and he'd never quite forgiven the world for that. My brother Marcus was their consolation. He was 3 years older than me, handsome in a conventional way, confident in that specific manner of people who have never had a room turn cold when they walk into it. He was good at beginnings, at first impressions, at the warm handshake, at sounding authoritative in the first 5 minutes of a conversation. He struggled with the middle and the end of things, with the follow-through, with the sustained attention that actual building requires. But our parents didn't see that or didn't want to. Marcus was the one who understood the room. I was the other one. I don't say that with bitterness anymore. I used to. For a long time the question that kept me awake at night was not why don't they see me, but the sharper, more poisonous version. What is wrong with me that I am so easy to dismiss? I internalized it the way children do. I became quiet in rooms where my family was loud. I stopped offering opinions at Sunday dinners. I learned to smile at the edge of my own erasure because at least that way I retained some control over it. What I did instead of fighting for space in that house was I built space somewhere else. I was 14 when I wrote my first program. A crude inventory tracker for my uncle's hardware store, built over a summer on a second-hand laptop because I'd read about databases in a library book and wanted to see if I could do it. My uncle paid me $60 and told me it was the best $60 he'd ever spent. That was the first time in my life I had produced something that was unambiguously, undeniably useful. Something that existed because I had made it exist, that worked because I had made it work. No one in my family could take credit for it or reshape the narrative around it. It was just mine. I studied computer science at Ohio State on an academic scholarship that my parents acknowledged once and never mentioned again. I graduated in 3 years. I moved to San Francisco at 21 with $11,000 in savings, a used MacBook, and a specific idea that had been living in my head for 2 years. A logistics coordination platform for mid-size manufacturing companies, the kind of businesses that were too small for enterprise software and too complex for spreadsheets. I had watched my uncle's hardware store operate on a system of handwritten notes and gut feelings, and I had understood, in that particular way that you understand things that are destined to occupy your life, that this was a solvable problem. The first year was brutal. I worked out of a shared workspace in the Mission, surviving on ramen and the kind of stubborn confidence that looks indistinguishable from delusion until it doesn't. I found my co-founder in a coffee shop, Daniel Reeves, a former supply chain manager from Detroit who had the domain expertise I lacked and the interpersonal warmth that my particular brand of relentless precision sometimes failed to project. We argued constantly for the first 3 months. We figured out how to argue productively for the next 3. By the end of year 1 we had our first 8 clients and a product that actually worked in the field. I did not tell my family any of this. I told them I worked in tech. When they asked what that meant I said software. When they pressed I said logistics software and watched their eyes glaze over and changed the subject. I'm not sure exactly when the deliberate concealment began. It had started as simple self-protection, the instinct of someone who had learned early that sharing aspirations in that particular family was an invitation for them to be minimized, questioned, or quietly co-opted. But as the company grew, as the revenues climbed, as the funding rounds closed and the industry publications ran pieces and Daniel and I began to understand that we had built something genuinely significant, the concealment became something more intentional. I was watching. I was waiting. I told myself I didn't know what I was waiting for. That was only partially true. By my 30th birthday, Sutton Reeves Logistics had 43 employees, operations in 6 states, an annual recurring revenue of $18 million. By my 32nd birthday we had been named to the Forbes Supply Chain Innovators list and had closed a Series B that valued the company at $140 million. Daniel and I owned the majority stake between us. I owned the larger half. I flew home for Christmas that year. My mother asked me if I was seeing anyone. My father asked Marcus about his sales pipeline over the turkey. I sat at the table and ate my food and watched the family I came from perform its rituals and thought, not yet. Not yet. But soon. The company my family had been building, and I should be generous here and say that they had genuinely been building it with real effort and real sacrifice, was a regional distribution consultancy. My father had left his ventilation company job 8 years ago to start it with a former colleague. Marcus had come aboard 3 years later. My mother handled the administrative and client relations side. It was, by the standards of what they had set out to build, a modest success. They had a staff of 12. They had a roster of regional clients. They had a reputation in Columbus that they had worked hard to earn. And they had been pursuing this contract with Hartwell Industrial, a $2.4 billion manufacturer based in Cincinnati, for 2 years. Hartwell needed a new logistics coordination system. Their supply chain was antiquated. They were hemorrhaging money in delays and mismanaged inventory and they knew it. The contract on the table, the $40 million one, the one my mother had applied her lipstick for, was not purely for consulting. It was for consulting plus the implementation of a software platform that could actually solve Hartwell's structural problems. My family's consultancy could do the consulting half with their eyes closed. The software half was the problem. They didn't have it. They had been scrambling for 8 months to find a tech partner who could provide the platform component, and they had not found the right one, and the Hartwell meeting, today's meeting, was the one where they had to present a complete solution or lose the contract to a Chicago firm that had both the consulting pedigree and the software in-house. What my family did not know, what I had known for 6 weeks because Daniel had told me, because Daniel had been in preliminary conversations with Hartwell's operations team, because Sutton Reeves had been quietly identified as the strongest platform candidate for exactly this kind of mid-size manufacturing problem, was that the meeting they were walking into was a meeting I had been invited to 3 weeks before they were. I had not told them. I had told Priya. I had told Daniel. I had told my therapist, Renata, who had looked at me across her office in the Richmond district and said, "What are you hoping comes out of this?" And I had sat with that question for 2 weeks without fully answering it. What I wanted, I think, what I had always wanted from my family, stripped of all the armor and the strategy and the long careful patience, was simply to be seen. Not celebrated. Not apologized to. Just seen clearly and honestly, without the distorting lens of a story they'd written before I was old enough to write my own. The boardroom was the only place I knew how to arrange that. The Hartwell Industries headquarters occupied 6 floors of a glass office tower on 4th Street in Cincinnati. I had been there before, twice. Once for a site assessment with their operations VP and once for a working session with their IT leadership. The security team knew my face. The receptionist, a steady-eyed woman named Gloria, greeted me by name when I came through the lobby. "Miss Sutton. Mr. Reeves is already upstairs." "Thank you, Gloria." The elevator opened on the 14th floor conference suite. Daniel was at the far end of the room talking with Hartwell CO, a broad-shouldered man named James Hartwell III who had the particular bearing of someone who had inherited something significant and spent his life proving he deserved it. They were laughing about something. Daniel caught my eye and smiled. "She's here," he said with the mild satisfaction of someone whose faith had never wavered. James Hartwell extended his hand. "Claire. Good to see you again." "James." We shook. "Is the room set up the way you wanted?" "Perfect. Exactly as we discussed." I took my seat at the head of the table. Not the seat I had chosen for ego, but the one that put the presentation screen directly behind me, the one that the lead presenter always took, the one whose position in the room told every story that needed to be told before a single word was spoken. I opened my laptop. I arranged my notes. I accepted a glass of water from the catering staff. Outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, Cincinnati was doing what Cincinnati does in October. Gray sky, golden trees, the river somewhere beyond the buildings like a rumor of something larger. My phone buzzed. "Priya, your family just checked in at reception. Coming up now." I set the phone face down. I looked at the door. I thought about my mother's face in the hallway mirror this morning, pressing her lips together. I thought about Marcus and the price sticker on his portfolio. I thought about my father saying sweetheart in that particular way. I thought about the 14-year-old girl with the second-hand laptop and the library book about databases. Not yet. Not yet. But now. The conference room door opened. I will tell you exactly what happened because I have replayed it enough times that I know the sequence precisely. My mother came through the door first. She was scanning the room. The Hartwell executives along one side, the catering setup, the presentation screen, in the practiced way of a woman who has walked into a lot of rooms and immediately assessed her position in them. Her eyes went to the head of the table last. She stopped. Not a dramatic stop. A small one. A half-step arrested, a micro-hesitation. I watched her process what she was seeing. Me in the charcoal blazer at the head of the table, with a laptop open and a glass of water and the settled, unperformative posture of someone who had been in this room before. Her face did something complicated. It started to form an expression and then thought better of it. My father came in behind her. He saw me a beat later and his chin actually pulled back. A small, involuntary motion like a man who has touched something hotter than expected. Marcus was last. He stopped in the doorway and looked at me and I could see very clearly that unlike our parents he was not confused. He was, I think, putting things together very quickly. His jaw tightened. The 3 of them stood just inside the door. No one in the Hartwell team seemed to find anything unusual about this. A few were checking phones. James Hartwell was finishing a word with Daniel. The room had the pleasant ambient noise of professionals gathering before a meeting. Then James Hartwell stood because that's the kind of man he is. The kind who marks moments with physical presence. "Before we begin," he said to the room, "I want to make an introduction because context is useful." He gestured toward me. "This is Claire Sutton, co-founder and CEO of Sutton Reeves Logistics, the platform partner we've been discussing as the technical backbone of this implementation. Claire is also," he smiled because Daniel had briefed him because I had asked Daniel to brief him, "a person some of you may already know." He looked at my mother. "I understand your family is also presenting today." My mother's folder, the one with the Sutton Family Consultancy letterhead, the one she had prepared over weeks, the one she had not let me see, slipped from her hand. It didn't drop entirely. He caught it. But the papers inside shifted and one page skated out across the floor, and in the silence of that room the sound of it was enormous. No one moved to pick it up. James Hartwell continued professionally as if nothing had happened. "We're glad to have all parties in the room. It allows us to discuss integration directly." He took his seat. "Claire, do you want to begin?" I looked at my mother. Her face had found an expression now. It had settled on something that wasn't quite embarrassment and wasn't quite recognition. It was something more uncomfortable than either of those things. It was the beginning of understanding. I looked at my father. The word sweetheart was nowhere in his face. I looked at Marcus. He was looking at the page on the floor. "Thank you, James," I said. I opened my presentation. Let's talk about what Hartwell actually needs. What followed was 90 minutes of the most focused professional work I have ever done in my life, and I have had some very focused professional days. I walked the room through Sutton Reeve's platform, the architecture, the implementation timeline, the case studies from comparable manufacturers, the numbers, the actual numbers, the ones that showed what the system had done for companies like Hartwell in terms of inventory accuracy and delay reduction and bottom-line impact. Daniel handled the technical Q&A. I handled the strategic framing. We had done this presentation together 40 times. We were very good at it. My family sat in chairs along the side wall. I want to be honest about what I felt during those 90 minutes because it was not clean. There was satisfaction in it. Of course there was, I am human and I had been carrying this for a long time. But underneath the satisfaction there was something sadder and more complicated. I kept not looking at my mother. I would be mid-sentence making a point about supply chain integration and my peripheral vision would find her face and I would look away. Because what I saw there was not the expression I had imagined when I'd pictured this moment. It was not chastened superiority or collapsed arrogance. It was something more like grief. Like a woman watching a version of her life that she had misunderstood, and understanding it too late to change anything. That was not what I wanted. I don't think I'd let myself know until that moment that it was not what I wanted. When the presentation ended, James Hartwell asked me 3 sharp questions that I answered without consulting my notes. Then he leaned back and said, "This is the platform. This is what we needed." He looked at James. James nodded. Then James turned to my family. "We appreciate you coming today," he said. It was a kind sentence. It was also a closing sentence. My mother knew it. I could see her know it. My father started to say something. Marcus put a hand on his arm. The meeting broke for coffee. The Hartwell team circled Daniel and me. Pleasantries, specifics, the comfortable language of people who have decided and are now arranging. My family stood near the window. Not together exactly, my father by the glass, my mother by the door, Marcus somewhere between them. I watched my brother pick up the page that had fallen from my mother's folder. He looked at it for a moment. He set it on the conference table, smoothed it with his palm and walked to where my mother was standing. He said something to her quietly. She shook her head once. The Hartwell contract was formally offered to Sutton Reeves 2 days later. I was in the San Francisco office when the call came in. The real office, not the kitchen counter. In the good chair with the city visible through the windows that I had not told my family about. I accepted. Daniel and I celebrated with the team that evening. Priya ordered Thai food. Someone found a bottle of champagne at the back of the small refrigerator in the break room and we drank it out of coffee mugs because that's the kind of company we are. The kind that has 43 employees who care about the work and a break room with a second-hand fridge, and a co-founder who still sometimes can't believe he gets to do this. I went home at 10. I sat on my couch and looked at my phone for a while. There were 3 missed calls from my mother. No voicemails. 1 text from my father sent at 7:42 p.m. "We should talk." 1 text from Marcus sent an hour later that said only, "I knew." Not everything. But more than I said. I'm sorry. I read that one twice. Marcus had known or suspected, more than he'd let on. For how long I wasn't certain. He'd visited me in San Francisco 2 years ago, ostensibly for a friend's bachelor party. We'd met briefly for dinner and I had been less careful than usual. I had mentioned the company by name in passing without thinking. I'd seen something shift in his face. He had not asked a follow-up question. I had not offered one. We had talked about other things and said goodnight on a street corner and gone back to our version of a relationship, which was polite and careful and largely performed for our parents' comfort. He had said nothing. For 2 years. I didn't know yet what to do with that. I still don't fully. I called my mother back at 11. She answered on the first ring, which meant she'd been holding the phone. "Claire," she said. "Mom." The silence between those 2 words was several years long. "How long?" she asked. Her voice was careful. Stripped of its usual performative quality, it sounded different. Smaller and also more real. "The company is 4 years old," I said. "The success took longer." "You didn't tell us." "No." "Why?" This is the question I had prepared an answer to. I had a good answer. It was true and measured and fair. I had rehearsed it with Renata. What came out instead was, because I didn't think you'd believe me. And I think I was right. She was quiet for a long time. That's fair, she said finally. It was the most honest thing my mother had said to me in 20 years. It landed somewhere in my chest and stayed there. We can talk more, I said. If you want. I want, she said. We talked for an hour. Not about the business, mostly about other things. Older things, the house in Columbus and the way I used to go quiet at the dinner table, and a Christmas when I was 9 that she brought up unexpectedly and that I didn't remember the way she remembered it. We talked around the edges of something that we didn't have the vocabulary for yet. So, that's as much as one phone call can do. My father did not call. In the weeks that followed, he would become the hardest piece of this. Harder than I expected. His silence was not the punishing kind I came to understand. It was the silence of a man who had organized his self-concept around a particular kind of authority and was now required to reorganize and didn't know where to start. 3 weeks after the boardroom, he sent me a text that said, "Your grandmother would have understood you better than I did. He built things too. I think I forgot that about her." That was all. But I kept it. Sutton Reeves began the Hartwell implementation in January. It would run 18 months. On the first day, I flew to Cincinnati and walked into the same building and took the same elevator to the 14th floor, and Gloria at the front desk said good morning and I went to work. My family's consultancy, I learned through Marcus, had lost 2 other bids in the months that followed, not because of the boardroom or not directly, but because the market had shifted and the thing they'd been good at was being absorbed by larger players with more integrated offerings. My father hired a business consultant in February. Marcus enrolled in an executive education program on digital transformation. My mother began quietly restructuring the client services side toward a specialty niche she'd identified. And I'll say this for her, she identified it correctly. She has a real talent for finding what rooms need, even when she misreads who the people in those rooms are. I offered no help that wasn't asked for. Marcus called in March to ask if I knew anyone in the Columbus tech ecosystem who might be willing to talk to him about a potential pivot. I gave him 3 names. He thanked me. We talked for 45 minutes. Not about the business, not about the boardroom, but about a book we'd both apparently read years apart, and a trip he was thinking of taking, and a restaurant in Columbus that had just closed that we'd both loved as kids, and that we grieved the way people grieve small things that carry large memories. We are not fixed, my brother and I. We are something more interesting than fixed. We are in the process of becoming something we've never been, which is 2 adults who actually know each other. There is one more thing I want to tell you, because the story is not complete without it, and because the 7 craft principles I've built into every story I tell require me to be honest about what was lost alongside what was found. In the weeks after the boardroom, I went back to Renata's office and sat in the chair across from her, and she said, "How do you feel?" I told her I felt vindicated. I told her I felt seen. I told her about my mother's voice on the phone, smaller and more real. I told her about my father's text about my grandmother. I told her about Marcus and the restaurant that had closed. She let me talk for 20 minutes and then she said, "What about the years in between?" I didn't answer for a while. "You can't get those back," she said. Not cruelly, gently. "The family you needed at 22, at 25. The one that would have believed you before you had to prove it. That family doesn't exist now any more than it existed then. What do you do with that?" I didn't have an answer in the session. I don't have a complete one now. What I have is this. I built the company without them, but I built it carrying them. Carrying the need for their approval that I pretended not to have, making decisions shaped by the absence of their belief, working with a kind of furious sustained intensity that was only partly passion and partly proof. That's not all bad. It drove real things. But I can feel the shape of what it cost. The energy that went into the long patient waiting instead of simply living. The relationships I kept at arm's length because my bandwidth was consumed by a family negotiation that took a decade to reach its necessary scene. The boardroom was not the beginning of something. It was the end of something and the beginning of a grief I had not anticipated. The grief for a relationship I had constructed an entire decade of strategy around healing, and that was now available to be healed finally, and that would still take years, and would never be what it might have been if it had happened at 22 when I'd needed it. That's the honest version. The version that doesn't resolve cleanly. The one that stays with you. I am writing this on a Tuesday in October, 1 year after the boardroom. Outside my office windows, the real ones, the San Francisco ones, The fog is doing what Bay Area fog does in the morning, which is pretend the city doesn't exist and then relent. Sutton Reeves has 61 employees now. The Hartwell implementation is on schedule. We are in early conversations about a Series C. Daniel's wife had their second child in August, a girl they named Eleanor, and we all crowded into the conference room and ate cake from a bakery on Valencia Street, and Daniel cried openly and without embarrassment, and I found that I was crying too, not for Eleanor specifically but for the whole accumulated weight of having built something real with someone who trusts you completely. My mother texted me last week to say she'd seen a mention of our company in an Ohio business publication. She said, "You should have told us. I understand why you didn't. Both things are true." I saved it next to the one from my father about my grandmother. I call home twice a month now. The calls are careful and honest and short and slowly, very slowly, becoming the kind of thing I used to be afraid to want, because wanting something you're not sure you can have is its own particular exposure. But I want it. I'm not afraid to say I want it. I am 34 years old. I run a company that works. My co-founder is my closest professional ally and one of my actual friends. I have an apartment with good light. I have a therapist who asks the right questions. I have a brother who is slowly becoming someone I know. I have a family that is slowly learning to see me. Not fully yet. Not without the old distortions still showing up sometimes in the corners. But learning. Trying. That will have to be enough. For now it is.